Hey everybody, and welcome back to another 5-minute Bible study. Today we're talking about Deuteronomy chapter 9. Before we get into that, I did want to shout out my wife and let you know that I put some links down in the description to her work and to her business. She's a certified functional medicine practitioner who works with women on a number of different health issues. And she does one-on-one client work. She does courses or has courses available for sale online and a number of other things. So if you're a Christian woman if you're any woman looking for a functional medicine provider, and as specifically one that comes to her field with a Christian worldview, which is somewhat rare if you know anything about the functional medicine space. Just wanted to let you know her information's down there. But now we're going to talk about Deuteronomy chapter 9. This PDF that you're going to see up on the screen, you can download it for free on our website at tobelikechrist.com. When did the events of Deuteronomy chapter 9 happen? We are in about 1450 BC. Moses is giving some speeches. He's talking to the Israelites before his death, giving them instruction about what they need to do when they enter into the land of Canaan. Deuteronomy chapter 1 verse 5 tells us that Moses began these discussions on the first day of the 11th month in the 40th year following the Israelites' departure from Egypt. And then to our characters, we've been talking about the Israelites and Moses quite a bit. So I'm just going to say we're going to talk about them again in this chapter. We are also going to talk about Aaron, who was Moses's brother. And Aaron was special because he was the first high priest of Israel. And specifically in this chapter, we're going to talk about a mistake that he made early on in his work with Moses. He made an idol, a golden calf, while Moses was up on Mount Sinai. You can read about that in Exodus chapter 32. And going down to our map, we're still in the same location. Deuteronomy chapter 1 verse 5 tells us that Moses spoke the words that are recorded in Deuteronomy in Moab near Mount Pisgah, Numbers chapter 22 verse 1. So moving on into our outline, I've got this whole chapter under one section, and I've entitled it, Israel Reminded of Their Stubbornness and Their Wickedness. So God promised that he was going to empower the Israelites to conquer the land of Canaan, even though their enemies were stronger than they were. But God wanted to make something clear. He did not want the Israelites to think that he was going to give them that land because of their personal righteousness, because they were just so holy and they deserved it, right? In fact, he told them that that was not the case. They're definitely not getting this land just because they're so personally righteous. The Israelites were going to be allowed to conquer the promised land because actually of the wickedness of the nations who lived there before them. As we go through Deuteronomy, we'll talk about some of the wicked things that the nations that lived in the land of Canaan before the Israelites, what they did. God intended to punish those nations for the evil that they had done, and he was going to use the Israelites to do it. The other reason that God was going to give the Israelites the promised land is because of the promises that he had made previously to the forefathers, the ancestors of the Israelite nation, Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, and Joseph. So he was keeping his word. Moses really wanted to drive home the point that the Israelites weren't getting the promised land because they were especially well behaved. And in order to drive that home, he brought up two instances where they had rebelled against God. Number one was when the people made an idol, a golden calf, and worshipped it while Moses was on Mount Sinai receiving the law from God. Right, so Moses is up on the mountain, he's getting God's instructions, they're downstairs making an idol. You can read about that in Exodus chapter 32, as I mentioned. And then the second instance that he brought up was when Israel abandoned faith in God and they despaired at the negative report that was brought back by the 10 faithless spies who spied out the land of Canaan. Numbers chapter 13 and 14. You remember that's what caused them to have to wander in the wilderness 40 years is because they abandoned faith. So Moses is like, listen, you can believe a lot of things, but what I don't want you to believe in is that you're getting the promised land because you're so godly. So on both occasions, Moses said that he had to plead with the Lord not to destroy the Israelites. So he had to intercede on their behalf. Okay, so that is Deuteronomy chapter 9. Let's now go down into our application section. Critics of the Bible, and you may have heard this in the past, they love to present the Israelites' conquest of the Canaan land as this bloodthirsty, kind of imperialist march of violence that was sanctioned by God to steal land that belonged to these poor, innocent townspeople, the Canaanites, right? But this chapter and other sections of the Bible reveal that the people of Canaan were not innocent. In fact, the text says that they were evil and they had done terrible things, and God intended on using the Israelites to punish them. God actually did this to several nations in the Old Testament. He used one nation to come against another nation that was wicked and to punish them and humiliate them. He actually did this to the Israelites later on in their history when they became corrupt. So one thing that we need to take away from this is that these types of mischaracterizations of the character of God and what the Israelites were actually doing, and whether or not this was a terrible thing to do, these mischaracterizations that these critics bring up are part of the reason that we need to study these lesser-known Old Testament texts, so we can understand what's actually going on in the Bible story rather than just looking at it from however these critics want to characterize it. So critics certainly aren't shy about abusing lesser-known texts. So if we want to be equipped to combat a lot of these bad arguments, we need to know our Bible.